This is the parable of the empty cup. It's attributed to a conversation between the scholar Tokusan and Zen master Ryutan. Once upon a time, there was a wise Zen master. People traveled from far away to seek his help. In return, he would teach them and show them the way to enlightenment. On this particular day, a scholar came to visit the master for advice. "I have come to ask you to teach me about Zen," the scholar said. Soon, it became obvious that the scholar was full of his own opinions and knowledge. He interrupted the master repeatedly with his own stories and failed to listen to what the master had to say. The master calmly suggested that they should have tea. So the master poured his guest a cup. The cup was filled, yet he kept pouring until the cup overflowed onto the table, onto the floor, and finally onto the scholar's robes. The scholar cried, "Stop! The cup is full already. Can't you see?" "Exactly," the Zen master replied with a smile. "You are like this cup, so full of ideas that nothing more will fit in. Come back to me with an empty cup."
It is time for today's message. Here to speak to us is a current resident teacher of the Sophia Zen Center in South Bend, John Petersen. He started his Zen practice in 2003 and was appointed teacher in 2023 by Ruben Habito of the Maria Kannon Zen Lineage. He will give us an introduction to Zen as a non-religious, ecumenical, and spiritual practice. He believes the practice of Zen is an awakening to the dynamic reality of the present moment, and therefore to our own true self. It is a practice of coming home to that place where our heart is whole and completely free to respond to a wounded world with boundless compassion. Here is John. He'll be coming up. He will be available after the service for those who have questions. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's difficult to talk about Zen for exactly the predicament that Tokusan found himself in, filled with ideas. I want to say that I came to Zen through Christian centering prayer, and then my father introduced me to Ruben Habito, and then his wife, who's also a teacher. And they studied in somewhat famous small Zen center in Japan, the Sonon Zen Center. It's known primarily for the book of 3 Pillars of Zen. But it was in that Zen center that the teacher opened it up to non-Buddhists, there were a number of Catholics in particular and Jewish practitioners. And there was real question at that time, this was in the 60s, of whether people of other religions or non-religious could really participate in Zen. And it was that teacher's students who helped bring Zen to the States and to the West. And so I think my experience is sort of an Americanized version of it, or flavor of it, I should say. But Zen is not a religion, it's a spiritual practice. And it's open to people of all traditions. And it doesn't require belief in a deity as much as trust that there's something more to life than what it appears to be. And trust in an ancient tradition of sitting still, sitting in silence. In Zen, wisdom is passed down by experience rather than words or doctrine. And thus this tradition of having a teacher, not that the teacher can give you really anything, but more of like a midwife, where you are coming to life, bringing life to the fore, and that the Zen teacher helps that along, a natural process helps along. Let me say a little bit about what Zen is not. It's not something to get or have. if we did get these things, these fruits of Zen, we'd find that they slip through our fingers. We don't sit in meditation to get something. Rather, Zen's about letting go of our grasping, letting go of getting something. So we sit in meditation, in stillness and silence, to be, to just be. An open-handed being, no grasping and clutching. So there's not getting versus letting go. And then Zen is not something you do. We often measure ourselves by accomplishment, achievement, and derive a sense of self from doing. And if so, then there's never going to be enough that we can do. There's always something not yet done. There's something about this self that needs to be in motion to feel like a self. So if Zen isn't something we do, then there's no Zenning out or getting my Zen on. It's not really about turning away from the stress and suffering of the world to have a little corner of peace to yourself, although it will bring you peace. Rather, it's just about being again, in the most open, transparent way, without resistance or hindrance, without resistance to life as it is. And in doing so, we're in a much better position to respond compassionately to the world. And then Zen is not about knowing. The fruits and discoveries of Zen give a taste of what life truly is, who you truly are. It cannot be known intellectually. It can't be expressed in words. Thus the irony of giving a Zen talk. And the whole predicament of Tokusan and Master Raitan. In fact, talking about Zen in Zen circles, they call it dirty talk. Because, you speak necessarily in concepts and ideas, and it's so easy for us to latch on to an idea. And then if you're in the idea, then it's not it. So talking about Zen sort of muddies the waters. But really my sincere hope is that you can listen to this in the way that we suggest at the Zen Center, which is, let me say, usually when we give a Zen talk, we've sat still for at least an hour, broken up a little bit. And so we're all in this stillness in this room together, and I usually know the people present, and it's much easier just to speak from the heart. And these words are sort of pointers. And the suggestion in listening to a Zen talk is that you not try to remember so much or intellectualize, but just let the words wash over you and just see what touches you, that's all. And just trust that, whatever resonates. Well, one of the noble truths in Zen is that life includes suffering, or often called dukkha. This dukkha is a kind of dis-ease. It literally suggests being off-center. So the image is like an axle that's off-center on a cart. So it's this hesitating and lurching and hesitating and lurching. Versus if it's centered, things are much more at ease. And the second noble truth is that it comes from craving or attachment. It comes from wanting to hold on to things that are impermanent. And the third noble truth is that there's a way out. There's a way out of that. So regarding the first, that life includes suffering, even for those of us who are relatively healthy and wealthy, most if not all of us here, we do experience this fundamental dis-ease or discontent. Something at some level just not quite right, like Nikolai in the story. It was a beautiful day, his friends are there, checking on him, he's met the tortoise, who was, he doesn't, and yet his questions were unanswered. There's just something nagging. And in case you haven't noticed, things are falling apart. So we could say that about our country, communities, the geopolitical stage, things coming apart, disordered, breaking. But in our own lives. My father would often say, it's one damn thing after another. And he said that with like pretty close to perfect contentment. It's just a fact. There's always something breaking or coming undone, or progress that is being undone. And then there's this predicament that if all goes well enough, you'll have the good fortune to grow old. And with that comes limitation and eventually illness and death. So it's been said there's two kinds of people. There's those who have died and those who are soon to die. And that's a fact that sits with us if we're not running away from it. Ultimately, however, David Loy, a Zen teacher in our lineage, says this disease comes from a sense of lack. And this lack originates from the fallacy that we're separate from others and separate from things, separate from the universe. And often with this sense of separateness, we go looking outside of ourselves for contentment. And ultimately, meditation is a kind of looking inward. But fundamentally, we do not exist in the way that we think we do. We're in fact not separate from each other, from things, from the universe, the way we think we are. So you may have heard in Buddhism, all things are one. And I'm sure we can all assent to that idea at some level. We're all stardust, for example. But in our common way of being in the world with our discursive mind, we perceive this I, me. I'm situated in this body with this consciousness between my ears, behind my eyes, looking out through the windows of the eyes. And then there's this other. I'm here, the floor there, you're there. Well, that's an alienation from your fundamental true self. True self, as Thomas Merton called it. It sets up a self that does not really exist. And as with most fallacies, it takes a continual effort to maintain it, to prop it up. So not only do we create this perceived lack or separateness, but we exhaust ourselves in constantly propping it up. Psychologically, it's like this contingency of self-worth. So I'll be worthwhile when, or I'll be more worthwhile if. That contingency is sort of, in my opinion, the crux of all suffering, psychologically speaking. And so we start to try to fill this lack. If I achieve more or such and such, if I get or have money being the placeholder for almost all desire. It's like desire frozen, right? It could be for status, for attraction, for freedom, so many things. I'll be more worthwhile when I bring peace to myself and others or avoid conflict, when I'm in perfect control of myself or things. Or if I have the moral high ground, escape negative judgment from others. The list goes on. But it all boils down to a contingency that to be worthwhile, I must do, be, get, know. And I'll never really be able to rest in the safety of what is. So there's something in psychology called the default mode network. They discovered this in, I think it's been about 15 or 20 years, but it was a brain study research replicated over many years that they were studying where in the brain does a certain activity take place. So if I give you a puzzle to manipulate with your hands, what's going on, right? Something in the cortex motor strip. Or if I ask you to think about something, work a mental puzzle, what's going on in the brain? And in between the tasks, they kept the machine going. I don't know if it's functional MRI or perhaps, but what they noticed is that when not doing the task that takes our attention, when you're at rest, the default mode network is what it's come to be called, kicks into high gear. And I say, what's that? And it kicks into high gear when you have a level of automaticity where you're not giving effort to concentrate on something. So when you're walking, when you're sleeping, sometimes when you're eating, pauses in conversation, daydreaming, this default mode network kicks up. And what that network is, it's our effort to spin narratives about life, about self, others, and the world, and it tends to be a social narrative. It's storytelling about the sense of self and world, including imagined past and imagined future. So one thing that we're doing is we're trying to predict and sort of simulate all kinds of iterations of the future and figure it out and anticipate it. And most of which never really come to be. And it also involves consolidating of memories, even during sleep. This is one of the main functions of sleep, is that we consolidate memories, and many of our memories are autobiographical stories, figuring things out, me in this world as a separate being, or even as a separate being who's also connected. It's this not oneness, right? Not two. That there are two and not one. So it's constantly going. And it has a negative bias. So we tend to see negative more, we tend to remember more negatives, and we tend to anticipate negatives. It's just, I imagine, I don't know, this is per John Petersen, not the research. I imagine that sort of makes it all pick up steam. Because now there's an anxiety behind it. So it's like scrolling on your phone. Social narrative after social narrative after social narrative. Do you know anyone who's ever done that? It's exhausting. And it separates us from what life is, where it's happening, which is here and now. And it stirs this lack. A lack that gives rise to compensatory striving. Striving to get something we don't have, to know something yet unknown, to be something we're not. And if not striving to fill the lack, well, then we're distracting ourselves from that experience. As a spiritual practice, Zen is simple. You sit in a posture conducive to stillness, breathe freely, naturally, allowing the breath to be the guide so you can settle in. The breath and mind work together and they become still together. We have some volitional control over our bodies, and so we still the body and let this breath, the natural movement, life-giving movement, just follow the breath, and then the mind settles down on its own accord. And there we can be at rest and be calm, and it slows down the default mode network. So in this sitting, people discover a sense of peace, relaxation, but also deep states of samadhi or peace, and where we don't have to be so busy. And there's a sense of equanimity in it as well. It also improves sleep. You fall asleep faster, sleep better, improves concentration. My teacher would always hyphenate concentration with centeredness, that in sitting, ideally daily, that we live out of a centered way of being, so that we're not sort of pushed about so much by the storms of life. We can still respond and be engaged, and yet there's something that's untouchable or immovable. And this is really the first fruit of Zen practice: emotional, physical well-being, and a sense of equanimity, and it's totally worthwhile. This is, as far as I can tell, a lot of what mindfulness meditation is. Zen suggests there's a second fruit and a third fruit. And the second fruit is about tasting one's true nature. It answers big questions. Who am I? What's this world all about? Or Nikolai, was it the most important person to be with, the most important thing to do, and I forget the third. These are the big questions. In my own practice, it was fundamentally what's my relationship to other people, and therefore what is my responsibility to them. So continuing with daily practice leads to a letting go of the grasping, of working against the reality of oneness with this fallacy of separateness, right? And we slow down the default mode network, and we start to have a sense of kinship with all things. The first fruit of equanimity can be cultivated with intention. Sit every day and it'll come. The second fruit is really more of a moment of grace. It's an accident. And meditating regularly can make you happily accident prone. But you can't do it. You can't get it. You can't arrange for it. It's more like opening your heart to grace. And it comes in a concrete moment. It's a transformative experience of the beginningless, uncompromising oneness of life. We never were, we're not now, and we never can be separate. Everything is given in the timeless now. There is no lack whatsoever. So here words like awakening or enlightenment are sometimes used. Among my Zen brothers and sisters, I often will just say an opening experience. I like to read for you the poet Mary Oliver's experience, not a Zen practitioner when this happened. I don't know if she started sitting later in life. But this is from Long Life, Essays and Other Writings. It's not a poem. She's talking about this second fruit. She writes, "Once years ago, I emerged from the woods in the early morning at the end of a walk. And it was the most casual of moments. As I stepped from under the trees into the mild pouring down sunlight, I experienced a sudden impact, a seizure of happiness. Not the drowning sort of happiness, rather the floating sort. I made no struggle toward it. It was given. Time seemed to vanish. Urgency vanished. Any important difference between myself and all of the things vanished. I knew I belonged to the world and felt comfortably my own containment in the totality. And I did not feel that I understood any mystery, not at all. Rather, I could be happy and feel blessed with the perplexity. The summer morning, its gentleness, the sense of the great work being done, though the grass where I stood scarcely trembled. As I say, it was the most casual of moments, not mystical, as the word is usually meant, for there was no vision or anything extraordinary at all, but only a sudden awareness of the citizenry of all things within one world, leaves, dust, thrushes and finches, men and women. And yet, it was a moment I've never forgotten, and upon which I've based many decisions in years since. One of the things I just love this most ordinary. In Zen, in this awakening, nothing is different, and yet it's transformative. And from the Christian tradition, the Catholic Trappist monk Thomas Merton, he had an experience. He was a monastic monk, and he, at the monastery, was off on his own for some years, off in a hermitage. But he went downtown Louisville. He was at Gethsemane, Kentucky. He went to downtown Louisville shopping. So he writes in Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, "In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness." So in Zen, that's the second fruit. And this is something that's to be tasted personally. People come to it, they don't come to it. They come to a kind of ripeness and then are graced with this. And so there's a problem with that in that, well, that can become a memory and can become intellectualized, and now we're stuck on separateness and oneness and nothing to do or get. And it can even go around talking about Zen too much and all that dirty talk. And so practice continues to wipe away the ego related to the experiences of it, but more importantly, to clarify the experience such that you can live out of that in every moment, I mean, ideally, every moment of your life. And that's a lifelong practice. It'll make you, well, I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to... I think that, borrowing from one of Ruben's book, he says, that must be what Paul in 2 Galatians of the New Testament was expressing when he says, it's no longer I who lives, but Christ in me. Or the famous Zen master Dogen, who said, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be actualized by the 10,000 things, all the things in the universe. So reading about Zen, listening to Zen talks, is like reading a menu. It can whet your appetite, but it won't really satiate. So I invite you, if you have the inkling and interest, to sit. Well, you do it here in your services. Very nice. I appreciated the meditation. Stop and sit. Follow the breath and feast in the moment, in the silence. Nothing to get or do or know or have. So some tips. Find a place. It's kind of nice if it's the same place each time, but it doesn't have to be. Find a time. The same time just helps develop a habit, but it doesn't have to be. And find a comfortable posture, ideally upright, where you can breathe freely, where you're not straining to be upright, but you can breathe freely, and let the breath be the guide. There is an app that's relatively new from a Zen master in our lineage, Henry Shukman, who's got a lovely British accent, and he's a poet, so everything out of his mouth is beautiful. And he's just a really generous man. And the app is called The Way, and it teaches you to meditate the Henry Shukman way. But there's no choices. You're going to do the next meditation or you're not. There's no skipping around and choices. And I just say, I'll personally guarantee he won't lead you down any strange alleys. And he offers scholarships. And I suggest meditation to a number of people I work with, and psychology is my day job, and they've found that helpful. So I've started sitting with Henry's app in the mornings and sitting without him in the evenings, just to taste what my clients were using, and I recommend that to you. Thank you for your time and for inviting me.